Hello out there, everyone. I want to share a few words with you tonight. Hope everybody's doing well. I want to go to Matthew 16, verses 17 to 19, specifically tonight, and touch on this subject of the gates of hell. Once again, I want to encourage everyone when you read the Bible, make sure that you don't lose sight of the context, don't lose sight of who is in the audience, who is Jesus speaking to, or who are the prophets or the disciples speaking to. That makes a big impact on what is actually being said and why it's being said. You don't want to pull verses out of context because you can come up with a lot of different ideas about what's being said that might not actually be true. So this is just another example of that, and I want to just read verses 17 to 19, and then I'm going to back up to the beginning of the chapter and just pull a couple verses out to show you what the context is of this setting of scriptures and why Jesus is saying what he's saying and who he is talking to. That makes all the difference here. So Matthew 16, verse 17. Jesus answered, said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. Jesus is asking Simon Bar-Jonah, whom do men say that I am? He says that in the previous verse. And then in verse 18, I say also unto thee, let's see, did I just miss a verse here? Peter tells him, thou art the Christ. And Jesus makes the point that showing Peter that he said, my Father touched your mind, touched your heart, and showed you who I am. This is a key that God reveals who Christ is. And so he goes into verse 18, and I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock will I build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And then in verse 19, and I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom. And I'm going to stop right there. That's not the end of verse 19, but I feel like the way this is written, that phrase about the keys of the kingdom really goes with verse 18, and I'm going to show you why. So let's back up to the beginning of the chapter. A lot of times in the Bible, not always, but a lot of times, he will give within the first couple verses of a chapter, he will give the context of what he's saying. And if you keep that in mind when you read the rest of the chapter, it's gonna keep you from getting sidetracked or going off on a rabbit trail. So in verse 1, he says, the Pharisees also with the Sadducees came, and tempting him, desired him that he would show them a sign from heaven. So the audience was the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and then of course his disciples. He's speaking to his disciples, but the Pharisees and Sadducees are within earshot. And then if you jump down to verse 6, Jesus said unto his disciples, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And then down in verse 12, the disciples didn't quite understand what he was talking about. They thought Jesus was talking about a loaf of bread. That's not what he was talking about. So in verse 12, then understood they how that he bade them not beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees. The doctrine or the teaching. What are they teaching? And more specifically, are they accepting that Jesus was the Christ? So this is why he lays out this phrase about the gates of hell in verse 18. And I'm going to just kind of give you the punchline, and then I'm going to go back to a couple other places in the scriptures and tell you why I think that this gates of hell is referring to those Sadducees, the Sadducees and Pharisees. This is why he is referring to them. He's telling his disciples, beware of their teaching. So a gate is a way in or a way out of something. That is what a gate is. And when it uses the word hell here, You got to make sure you keep this in the context. The gates of hell, or the way into hell. Hell here is just means darkness, confusion, not having any understanding. If you go over to Hosea 4 and 6, I think he says, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, or they're lost. They don't know how to get into the kingdom of God. There's false teachers. Over in 2 Peter 2:1, he says there was false teachers among the people. In Galatians 3:1, this is Paul speaking, of course, and he's referring to these Judaizing teachers, the same group of people, Pharisees and Sadducees, that were coming in and dismantling the teachings of the gospel that he was given to the Galatian church. So in Galatians 3:1, he says, O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you, or who has tricked you, who has deceived you? And then in 2 Corinthians 11, now remember, this is about teaching. This is about understanding. This is about having the right knowledge of the scriptures. This is what this setting in Matthew 16 is talking about. And if you go to, where did I want to go next? 2 Corinthians 11, right at the beginning, I think it's about the third or fourth verse there. He says, if this is Paul again, if anyone comes preaching another Jesus, so it's not just people denying who Christ is, but it's people teaching false ideas about Christ, about the scriptures. So let's back up. I want to back way up to Proverbs 5. And you might think this is an odd place to go, but I'm going to show you why it ties in. Now remember the two groups of people from Matthew 16. The Pharisees and the Sadducees that did not accept who Christ was, and the disciples who did accept. By Peter's words, they did accept who Christ was. Now, if you go to Proverbs 5:1, and we're going to read down to 5, Proverbs 5:1-5. My son, attend unto my wisdom, and bow thine ear to my understanding. So right there you got wisdom, understanding. Verse 2, that thou mayest regard discretion, and that thy lips may keep knowledge. So already we've got wisdom, understanding, knowledge. For the lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil. So you got two groups of people here. My son in the beginning, and then he's talking about this strange woman, this woman who is a stranger to God. Now this is not talking about a literal woman. When the Bible uses the term woman in a lot of contexts, he's talking about a religious group of people or a church. You can see that in Ephesians 5 if you want to turn there at some point. But he says her end in verse 4, her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. So why does he mention in the third verse her lips and her mouth? What do your lips do? What does your mouth do? It speaks. It teaches. It utters knowledge or information. But in this setting, this strange woman is teaching false ideas about God. And you'll understand that you can see the same narrative play out in Proverbs 7 and in Proverbs 9, almost the same exact kind of language. This is not talking about a literal woman. It's talking about the wise and the foolish, those that accept God's word and those that reject it. Okay, this is the context. And the reason that I'm going all the way back to Proverbs is the Bible is compiled of really kind of a pretty simple narrative. And it just repeats itself over and over and over again. If you keep that in mind, you'll understand the Bible is not just a bunch of random stories about this, that, and the other, and it's not scattered all over the place. It's showing a bunch of stories repeated to make a point, make the same point. And then specifically verse 5 in Proverbs 5, her feet go down to death. her steps take hold on hell. So why does he say that that her steps take hold on hell? Again, just like in Matthew 16, this hell is not some mystical place. It's confusion, it's darkness, it's having the wrong information, having the wrong knowledge. And he repeats that in Proverbs 7 and Proverbs 9 about the foolish having the wrong instruction, the wrong knowledge, the wrong wisdom. So wisdom is to, in verse 2 of Proverbs 5, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge is to keep you. It's to keep you safe from the lips of a strange woman or a false teacher. All right, so her steps take hold on hell. Remember, her mouth, her lips. It may sound good. It says it's smoother than oil, but it's leading people in the wrong direction. And so go back to Matthew 16. Remember, we're talking about the disciples versus the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Remember, a gate. A gate is a way in or a way out of something. So let's turn to Luke 11:52, talking about the same scribes and Pharisees, the Sadducees, Pharisees, these religious leaders. This is who this is talking to. You can read back up and find the context in your own time here. But he says, woe unto you lawyers. So Jesus is rebuking this same group of people. Woe unto you lawyers. You have taken away the key of knowledge. You entered not in yourselves, and them that were entering in you hindered. Gates, keys. You've taken away the key to get in. Okay, so look at Matthew. Let's see, Matthew 23 here. To me, these verses make this really, really clear. Matthew 23:13. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. You neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. Remember, a gate is a way in or a way out of something. This whole narrative is talking about the wise and the foolish. Jesus said in John 14, I am the way. He said in John 10, I am the door. In Matthew 7, it's right around 24 to 27, he says, a wise man builds his house on the rock, or builds his house on my teaching. He that heareth these sayings, teachings of mine, I will liken him unto a wise man. He that heareth these things and doeth them, I'm butchering this a little bit. He that heareth these things and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man that builds his house on a rock. There's that word rock again. Rock, teaching, understanding, the proper understanding of the scriptures. So same thing as Matthew 7 is the same thing as in those chapters in Proverbs, the wise and the foolish. And it has to do with teaching. What is your understanding? What are you believing? What are you teaching? He said in John 5, I think it's the 40th verse, he's talking to the same group of people. Jesus said, you won't come to me that you might have life. Or, another way to put that, you might find a way to go in. You might find a way to get in. The gates, the way in to either heaven. It's not heaven necessarily or hell. It's enlightenment or confusion, light and darkness. You can't get your mind too mystical out there. This is very simple. He's talking about teaching. So upon this rock will I build my church. He's not talking, back in Matthew 16:18, he's not talking about Peter, even though Peter's name means a stone. He's talking about the revelation that God the Father gave to Peter, that Jesus was the Christ. He was going to build his church on that rock or that revelation. And the gates, or these false teachers of darkness, won't prevail against the church that Jesus is building, because he's building it on the truth, on the rock. And I will give thee the keys of the kingdom, or the right understanding. Remember what Luke 11:52 said. I will give you the keys of understanding. That is one of the most important things that you get. In Christianity, there's so many different denominations. There's so many different interpretations of the scriptures. But you'll do yourself a big favor if you leave these verses in the context and don't let your mind get all mystical out into the clouds with demons and darkness and things like that. Keep the scriptures where they were written. Why was this said? Who was Jesus talking to? That'll do you a lot of favors when you read through the parables. Who's he talking to? Who's listening to him when he goes through these parables? You can't get caught up in the words when he mentions hell or something like that, or heaven. He's being very specific here. The false teachings, the gates of hell, are the false teachings or the false teachers, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, those fallen religious leaders that were not teaching Israel at that time the truth about God. All right, God bless you. Hope this video gives you something to think about at the very least.